Welcome everyone, and on behalf of Creativity Explored, I'm really happy to be here today and introduce you to our two panelists. We are going to be in conversation for about an hour, and questions could be added to the chat box, and we'll be addressing them, at the end. Again, welcome everyone to our Curator and Conversation session around the CE Gallery exhibition curated by Ajit Chauhan, The Park, A Darling Walk for the Mind. My name is Clea Massiani. I am the curator and exhibition coordinator here at Creativity Explored, and I have the pleasure to welcome Larry and Ajit. Larry is a former director and chief curator at the BAMPFA, as we call it, or the UC Berkeley Art Museum and Patsy Film Archive. Previously, he was the Anne and Joel Ehrenkratz Curator of Contemporary Arts at the Whitney Museum of American Art, where he organized exhibitions including the 2002 biennial. Prior to the Whitney, Rinder was founding director of the CCA Wattis Institute for Contemporary Arts in San Francisco and served as assistant director and curator for 20th Century Art at BAMPFA. His play, The Wishing Well, co-authored with Kevin Killian, premiered in 2006, and he is the author, with Coulter Jacobson, of the phototext novella To Leon. Ajit Chauhan lives in the sanctuary city of San Francisco. He works at Creativity Explored, reads a lot, listens to music, plays with cats, and practices Tai Chi. He is part of a small collective of poets and painters called Right Window, as forever member Kevin Killian will say, SF's #1 gallery. Chauhan has been exhibited in the Saatchi Gallery in London, White Columns, New York, CCA Wattis Institute for Contemporary Art, the Berkeley Art Museum, Jack Henley Gallery, Anna Ruma Gallery, SVIT Praha, and recently at the KMAC Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. He is this year's recipient to the TOSA Studio Award at the Minnesota Street Project. So please enter your question in the chat box once again and stay on mute, and we'll address them at the end. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Clea, and hello, everybody. I am very excited to participate in this panel, this conversation, because I had the perhaps somewhat too unique pleasure of actually being able to see the show in person, which unfortunately most people can't do because of our current crisis. And it's really beautiful, but you can, of course, see it online. All of the works are on the Creativity Explored website. One of the things that made this particularly interesting to me personally is that many of the artists in this exhibition were also included in the exhibition that I co-curated in 2011 at BAMPFA, a show called Create, that I curated with Matthew Higgs. And that exhibition was inspired by the kind of work that I was seeing come out of Creativity Explored, but also Creative Growth and NIAD. And I was just really struck by the quality of work at all three of these centers for adult artists with developmental disabilities here in the Bay Area. And as I began to look into it, I found that all three centers had been founded by the same couple, Florence and Elias Katz, in the 1970s and 80s. And they had a very wonderful, very progressive, and even to this day, kind of radical vision for this kind of center that combined a number of key points. One was professionalism. They wanted to maintain both a spirit and an actual fact of professionalism among the artists. They wanted to encourage and promote engagement with the broader arts community, which I think you really see happening very strongly at all three of these centers, and this conversation is evidence of that. And they also wanted to promote the existence of a shared and open studio space, which I think is maybe one of the most wonderful kind of innovations of these spaces. And I think there's a lot of artists who, when they walk into one of these spaces at Creativity Explored, Creative Growth, or NIAD, wish that they had a place to go to like that every day to make art with other inspired people. And that in part was the inspiration for the art lab that we created at BAMPFA. So Creativity Explored and these other centers have had a long and abiding impact on me and my understanding of art and art education and the art world. So this exhibition that I organized with Matthew Higgs included about 20 to 24 artists from all three of the centers. And in that exhibition, each artist was represented by a fairly large number of works, and each artist had their own space. So it was a sort of conventional group exhibition, and very different from the exhibition that Ajit has organized, which takes a much more intuitive and poetic approach to the juxtaposition and selection of works. So even though I think there are 6 artists who overlap, the kinds of insights that I get from looking at Ajit's show are very different from what I got from looking at my own show. So I'm excited to hear more from Ajit about his methodology and his inspiration for putting this show together. So Ajit, how did it happen?
Well, thanks, Larry. Well, I just want to thank Clea very much for the intro, and to thank you, Larry, for having this conversation. I've known you for many years, and I'm very familiar with your encyclopedic mind and knowledge of art, and there is no one I would rather talk to about the show than you, so thank you. It's wonderful to be with the Creativity Explored community. Thank you all for joining the conversation. I just wanted to start by saying that one of the things I tried to consider with this exhibition was the generative space between work. It's one of the many things I admire about you, Larry, the way you'll show a very well-known artist next to an unknown artist, or you'll show a work from the early 20th century next to a contemporary piece. And it's this kind of collapsing of time and space and value structures that produces this extremely generative experience. And it's something I thought about while selecting work at CE, which was mostly an intuitive process and just trying to be considerate about the needs of each work and how they sit next to one another. So if there was a piece that was very dense and saturated, maybe the piece next to it would need to allow it to breathe a little bit. I kind of thought about it like a mixtape, in the way that you wouldn't put 10 power ballads, one right after the other. That would be kind of an unthoughtful mixtape. So hopefully it's more like a kind of journey with peaks and releases, that there's a transformation that takes place in terms of your own psyche. The theme of the show initially was to highlight some of the more abstract work at Creativity Explored. I think CE is often associated with these very friendly portraits or animals, but some of the other work, the more abstract work, becomes less accessible. So I wanted to have this transition from recognizable forms and slowly move towards pure formal abstraction. And Alicia McCarthy immediately came to mind when I was selecting Mary Belknap's work. I just intuitively or instinctively kind of felt this connection and dialogue between both the artists and their work. And I wanted to make that connection tangible. So I asked Alicia to do some mark making throughout the gallery. Nothing too concentrated, just like a light sprinkling that informs everything. A little bit like French filmmaker Philippe Correll. He had a long relationship with Nico from the Velvet Underground, and his films reference that relationship, but he never uses music in his films. It's just ambient noise, and it makes you feel very present, except for like 4 or 5 seconds, there'll be some obscure, unreleased Velvet Underground distortion that just infuses the entire film and the feeling behind everything. So for me, it's a lot more affecting than films that are like music videos. So with Alicia, I wanted her to be behind everything, kind of informing everything with that feeling. So for like the street-facing wall that has the Lorene Niederker poem on it, I just said, I'm thinking of this wall as a book page, a blank book page. The poem will go here in the middle, and maybe you could make some notations or use yellow like a highlighter or a post-it note, whatever. And I think I'm realizing more in work and in life, if you can trust someone, it's not even a question if it'll work out. It's just a matter of appreciating all the tiny moments and little surprises that come from the collaboration. So I thought it was a wonderful pairing, and I'm very, very grateful to Alicia. And I think there's some images that Clea is going to show or run through to kind of illustrate what we're talking about. So they kind of just illustrate the process.
Ajit, you worked pretty much from the archive at Creativity Explored. Is that right? Going through works that they've been collecting over many years?
I did, yeah. The archives, well, if people aren't familiar with Creativity Explored, just a little bit of the layout. Sorry, Clea's share screen is going a little crazy on my computer. My computer's so old that I have technical trouble sometimes. But just to explain the layout a little bit of Creativity Explored, when you enter, you're immediately inside of the gallery. So it's kind of work in its completed form. And then you go to, oh, there you are back again. And then you enter the studio, which is kind of like you're met with this wave of energy and activity with the artists and the teachers. And it's an old, it's a Victorian building. I think it used to be a dance hall. So it's a two-story of open space with a skylight kind of flooding in. Oh, my computer's going crazy again. But anyway, I can't see anyone or the images, but I'm trusting that everything's there. Up and it's kind of a mezzanine. It kind of houses all of the Creativity Explored archive. So it's many, many flat files, and each artist has their own flat file of their body of work. So that was a wonderful experience going through the archives and selecting the pieces. It felt very intimate, I feel like, because usually CE is so bustling with activity and energy. So to go during off hours, when it was very quiet, it was just the sunlight pouring in through the skylights and just the wind and you know, the trees rustling outside, and then handling the work individually. It felt very intimate. I enjoyed it very much.
Can you talk about the poem? How did you come upon the poem, and when did you choose it? At what point in the process of putting the exhibition together?
Yeah. So, just in case everyone doesn't know, it's a Lorene Niederker poem. And Lorene Niederker was a poet from Wisconsin. My mother's from Wisconsin, and my parents met in Wisconsin. And she has a very kind of distilled expression of images and thought. And like Norma Cole, someone I read constantly and consistently, because I feel like they give me access to all kinds of subtleties that were inaccessible before. It feels like more of the world becomes available through reading their work. But anyway, I carry a notebook with me almost always since junior high. So I have many sketchbooks and notebooks that kind of record my thoughts and my ideas and things that I overhear and things that I read or misread. I recently got the Lutz Bacher book, Open the Kimono, which is a record of remarks collected by Lutz from the television, the radio, novels, the subway, and I can relate very much to that. But Niederker's title is one of those collected remarks, you could say, in my notebooks that I recorded. I think you're muted, Larry.
You're right, I am. It was, my cat was meowing. Can we go to the shots of the individual works now, and let's talk about some of these individual pieces?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we're going to start with a piece by Walter Kresnick, who is an artist that I was not familiar with before seeing this show, and I think the work is really terrific. As you can tell, I like cats. You can see the one up there behind me in this cat tower. Anyway, this is a fantastic drawing of a cat in a landscape, and I think it's got really terrific energy and a lot of subtlety of line and color. I think the interaction of the line and the washes of color is really very beautiful. But there's also something quite mysterious going on in this drawing that if you look at it, you see that there may be more than one cat in here, or there may be parts of cats floating around. Just to the right of the most obvious cat, you can see what looks a lot like a Cheshire cat smile that is sort of just the smile and maybe the eyes or the ears. But there's other fragments of cats or animals or God knows what floating around here. Ajit, I think it was either in your tour on the CE website or it may be in your introductory remarks on the website, you talk a little bit about this piece in relation to Alice in Wonderland, which is, of course, where the Cheshire Cat also appears. But how do you see this drawing as a kind of a key or an entrance point into the exhibition?
Yeah, well, when I was thinking about the exhibition initially, I wrote about it and I said that I wanted the viewer to take a fall down a rabbit hole, kind of like Alice in Wonderland. And somehow that was kind of misread or misinterpreted as an Alice in Wonderland themed show. And I kind of like misreadings in my own work. So I kind of went with that a little bit and kind of reinterpreted some of the work that I was selecting. So I thought of this piece as kind of like the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland, kind of like you said, an entry point or an invitation into the show, into the exhibition. But I would just echo some of what you said, that it's such a beautiful kind of delicate sense of line, and the forms and like the solid shapes have a very ephemeral, or kind of it's almost like the essence of a figure or a shape. And some of his other work, he'll use just kind of like a splash of color or a simple architectural element that has like a very light touch with these transparent washes of color, and they kind of delineate form and give a real sense of depth and distance that I really love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Belgian artist Raoul de Keyser once told me that
I love him.
Every exhibition needs a black dog. And his English wasn't that good, so I'm not sure that's what he really meant to say, but in any event, I've taken that to heart and really understood that to mean precisely this kind of work, that every exhibition needs a piece that might be somewhat anomalous, just a little off, maybe slightly perplexing in the context of the show, but which also is paradoxically a key to the rest of the exhibition. So perhaps this is your black dog.
Oh, that's a wonderful reading, yeah.
Well, let's go on to the next slide. So on the left here, we have two more pieces by Walter Kresnick, and they're a little bit hard to see. But here you can really clearly see the way that Ajit has juxtaposed the works with Alicia's underpainting, and you can see some of the marvelous kind of coincidences of form and color that emerge from that relationship. I really loved your analogy of this, the way that Alicia's contribution relates the work to the filmmaker and the Velvet Underground sound. What the image or the comparison that initially came to me when I saw this was Marcel Duchamp's Mile of String at the 1942 Papers on Surrealism exhibition, where he strung, I don't think it was literally a mile, but a lot of string throughout the gallery that sort of obstructed people's access to the work. And I think this is a much more subtle relationship to the works of art, and kind of more like an accent, as you were saying. In any event, the two on the left, the Walter Kresnicks, the one on the far left, it's a little hard to see, but very reminiscent of a certain type of Cy Twombly drawing that juxtaposes in an extremely laconic way an image and text, in this case, a sort of bit of food, and above it, it says cake. And I think, Ajit, it says above cake very faintly, chocolate, is that right? Chocolate?
That's right, uh-huh.
Yeah. And then just to the right of that is just a very simple horizontal line, kind of the essence of laconicism, if that's the word, that is really wonderfully rhymed with the horizontal lines of Alicia. And then the work on the right looks to me like an old-fashioned gumball machine, but I could be wrong. Ajit, what do you think it is?
I would go with something similar to that. I always think of it as kind of a gumball machine, or one of those ice cream cones that has the gumballs in it. Mm-hmm. Or it could be a swirl, almost like a bouquet, a very kind of...
yeah. Or a portrait of a very strange cat. You never know.
Right.
And then on the right, Mary Belknap, and Ajit mentioned her work before. She is really a terrific artist. She was in Create. And these three works all are, especially relative to some of her work, quite muted and restrained and laconic also. She earlier in her career did some extremely chromatic, brightly colored, very dense work that was actually figurative, images of trees and things like that. And at this stage, you can see that it's really become completely abstract and in a sense, self-referential in a kind of quasi-modernist way where the edge of the work creates the edge of the picture. Can we go back to that? There we go, yeah. And so you can see sort of three treatments of edge here. And of course, what that does, that framing, is that it draws your attention to the inner void. But one of the things I noticed when I went to see the show, that particularly in the work on the far right, and you can even see that here on the screen, that in that space that we might call a void, there are actually hundreds, maybe even thousands of tiny marks. And I wonder, Ajit, what you make of those marks, whether you think they were intentional or what role they play in particularly the composition of the larger work on the right.
Yeah, I think it's part of her art making, just the practice of how she worked. I'm not sure if it's when the whatever she's using is resting or not. I would tend to think that it would be more unintentional, as just part of the art making practice.
It does seem to me though, and I could be wrong here, but I think all the marks fall within the frame, which even, I mean, it may be unintentional, but it's a happy accident if so.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And one thing that I really love about her work is that when you're looking at the mark making, it at a very close level, it has a very kind of gestural quality. It's quite loose, actually, what she's doing. And when you step back, it has a very kind of formal presence and it looks a little bit more rigid. But the closer you get, the more kind of loose and the more it starts to break apart and gestural it is.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's go on to the next one, please. Okay, so here's a wonderful example of Ajit's very idiosyncratic approach to installing the work. So you see on the one on the left, you have this large Walter Kresnick drawing called, I think it's nude number 2, nude figure, and what I take to be a kind of a oceanscape, but I don't know if it really is that. Of course, against the backdrop again of the Alicia McCarthy marks, and then somewhat idiosyncratically juxtaposed in terms of sort of placement on the left, a really marvelous work by Lawrence Rinder, a wooden cube that has tunnel drawings on 3 sides. And then on the top, you can see in the detail on the right, you have a blue pigment, which I take to suggest the sky or the cosmos or something like that. And then on the right, a small ceramic medallion that I think is by James Miles. Is that right, Ajit?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So I think all 3 of these works have in play some kind of relationship of inner to outer space, of a kind of ground versus sky. And all of them, though, I think, particularly the Kresnick and the Rivers, have a stronger pull toward the inner space. And the way that the figure in the Kresnick faces down, which is very unusual, I think, for a nude in a landscape, which is not an unusual motif, particularly in the 19th century. There are lots of nudes disporting themselves in the waves and so on. But to be facing downward like this is kind of odd. Anyway, I love this juxtaposition. Anything you want to say about these, Ajit, before we move on?
Well, I would just kind of add that one of the biggest surprises was seeing all the different phases of an artist's work. So some artists have a 30-year, a 35-year daily studio practice. So there's an incredible knowledge and familiarity with material, language that they're working in. So to see different phases and stages is natural, but it was still wonderfully surprising. So to see something like James Miles's, I'm very familiar with his drawings, but to see a ceramic piece like this was just kind of a wonderful discovery for me. And I thought it fit so well with the Walter Kresnick nude, the same colors. It was almost an interpretation of the painting in ceramic form in a very condensed way.
Yeah,
go ahead, Larry.
Well, I was just going to say, I'd seen Lance's work on wood, but never one that was so kind of succinctly, perfectly resolved formally in terms of the content and the form as this one. I think it's really great.
I agree, absolutely.
Okay, let's move on. Another wonderful juxtaposition with two artists that I know well, Evelyn Reyes, the two drawings in the middle, and another James Miles on the right, and then an artist who I had not been familiar with, Hung K. Shu, on the far left. And it's a little bit difficult to see here, but the Hung K. Shu is a kind of a rickety architecture of kind of amorphous grids, some of which are filled in and others aren't. And there's a wonderful balance in this work between, I guess this might be a phrase that you used in one of your texts about the show, Ajit, chance and choice, and kind of, it may not be exactly those words, but that balance between kind of intention and liberty. And that's something I think is very much present in your own work. And I don't know if you want to say anything about any of these works in relation to your practice and whether there's particular influence, maybe in particular in relation to Hung K. Shu.
Oh, well, I feel like I can relate to so many of the artists in the show. Hung K. Shu, definitely. He was one of the original artists at Creativity Explored, and he left for a number of years and then rejoined again. But I just love, I mean, I can completely relate to the mark making and all the tiny marks and small hatched line segments and minuscule circles, and they kind of accumulate, and there's these subtle shifts in size, and the overall composition turns into this kind of stunning abstraction. This piece in particular, I kind of thought as kind of the painting the roses red scene in Alice in Wonderland, because you have these kind of certain segments that are colored red, and then some are left blank, like they're about to be painted, and then there's green segments. So it almost feels like a large garden composition to me.
Mm-hmm. And then you noted in your comments on the show, your written comments, that some of the marks that seem anomalous, like on the far left, those marks that go up to the left, I believe those what you're referring to as sleep lines that would occur when the artist would actually fall asleep in the process of making. And so just wonderful records of the material process of creation. And it's interesting that in the Evelyn Reyes that you see on the right, this is one of her cake drawings, which also at other times she called fence drawings. In what is otherwise a very rigorously defined kind of architectonic form, she does allow the lines to sort of go outside the frame at times. That it wasn't because she was falling asleep like Hung K. Shu, but still there is this a kind of an allowance for excess or yeah, something that goes beyond a rigidly defined formula and into some other space of openness. For those of you who don't know Evelyn Ray's, the work on the bottom is from her carrot series. So those are, to her mind, carrots, and they are marvelous. And then on the right, I think the next slide is the James Miles. Yeah, on the left, fantastic drawing of a circus scene by James Miles with this sort of quintessential James Miles play with scale and proportion and perspective. I just think this is such a marvelous, marvelous drawing. It's not one that I had seen before, although James Miles was included in Create and the work on the right was in Create. These two works had such a contrasting emotional tones. The one on the left is kind of pure joy, the smiles on all those faces, the play of the juggler and the trapeze cyclist. And then on the right, I can't help but think that this is really an anxiety fantasy because the figures are not smiling, and while they are, let's hope, flying, they may also be falling. I mean, there's something a little bit scary to me about this drawing, but also marvelous play again between scale and the perspective view. Ajit, anything about this, or should we go on?
I would just say I love all of James's work. I think it's so whimsical and wonderful, and it kind of reflects his nature in a way, because James is very soft-spoken, and if you see him at dance parties on Friday, he does very kind of small movements. He'll just rub his chin or pull his ears, and I mean, obviously all the work reflects the artist, but I think James in particular, you can really see his personality, and they have this wonderful whimsical quality.
I think on the one on the right, the figure written between the figures, I think that says James, and it's either the signature of the drawing or perhaps indicating that one or both of those figures is him. Okay, next. Okay, so here are two artists who were new to me, and so thank you very much for bringing these to my attention. Ajit, on the left, Klaus Grober, how do we pronounce his name?
Groger?
Groger. Klaus Groger. You can see they're kind of stippled, multicolored, very subtle sense of color in these two drawings, and a really extraordinary feeling of presence or a kind of apparition of something coming into form or going out of form, very much echoing, I think, the sensibility of the Walter Kresnick cat that we saw in the beginning. And I think these two were hung immediately adjacent to the Kresnick or very close to it. So a kind of a segue into the, further segue into the spirit of the show. These works remind me very strongly of a number of surrealist artists, including Picabia and André Masson, both of whose drawings have a similar kind of sense of overlay and superabundance of energy. And yeah, I really love these. And then on the right, a work by Connolly, and very different in sensibility to the Groger, but also kind of also has this same kind of balance between a kind of an order or something coming into form and yet an energy that pulls against that form. And in the case of Connolly, there's the sense of an implicit grid that is particularly pronounced in the kind of orange brownish marks, the horizontal and verticals, which overlay this wonderful palette of blues, greens, and yellows. And as I was looking at this work, which to me is very much kin in spirit to an artist like Joan Mitchell or someone like that, who is such a master not only of color, but also of brushstroke. And in this work, one of the things that I find so compelling about it is that the darkest marks, the brown, are also somehow the warmest. And it's kind of paradoxical. My brain can't kind of hold that thought, but I do feel it looking at it, that that overlay of brown with the kind of tinge of orange or red feels like such a smoldering presence in this work.
Yeah, I would just add with Klaus, for me, it was a wonderful discovery because most often he works with found objects. So buttons, bottle caps, beads, stones, nails, and he'll arrange them into these jewel box structures. And he does a lot of abstract gestural painting where he'll work with different forms of mark making. So a lot of scratching or painting over or reworking a surface. So this is a very, very early piece. And I think Suda might have been his instructor. It's kind of just hitting me right now, just how much the prompting of a particular instructor shapes the direction of the work. So each day an artist will work with a different instructor and the body of work that they're making can shift pretty drastically. So this is a very early piece. And with Anne Connolly, she was at CE for almost 3 decades. And I think she was a painter and a printmaker and made a lot of these energetic abstractions using bright complementary colors. It's almost like each band of color interacts with each band and shifts a little bit. And the brush strokes produce these kind of interesting results where they cross kind of the intersection for me. And in the same way that Alicia deals with bands of color interacting with each other to create like a larger form. I just think that the marks, Alicia's marks behind it almost feel like an extension of the work. I thought this is one of the most kind of successful dialogues.
Great. Okay, next. Okay, so another just totally marvelous discovery for me, Jose Campos, and you dedicated the show to him. He passed away earlier this year, and this is such an exquisite drawing. May or may not be a landscape, the way it's hung, it's sort of suggestive of that, but in any event, it's really the marks themselves and the connection between marks, the kind of sense of kind of viscera of some kind of interacting forms that both depend on each other and yet function independently, both chromatically and in terms of their direction, the gesture and the form. And it's, you know, after seeing this, I went and looked at more of his works in the archive, and I think they're just absolutely brilliant. Really just a great touch, a great sense of mark making. Can you tell us a little bit about this artist, who he was, and his career at Creativity Explored?
Yeah, so Jose Campos, he was born in El Salvador. A lot similar to what you were saying, a lot of the surfaces have this very kind of dissolving or disintegrating quality. They're very metaphysical for me. And a lot of them have like bird-like forms or plant-like forms that are mimicking birds, almost like a birds of paradise or something. I just think they're extraordinary. I love all of his work. And I did want to say a big kind of shout out to Anna, who took care of Jose, who's just the kindest human being you can imagine, while she was dealing with her own husband, who was dealing with the sickness. So I just wanted to say a lot of love to Anna for taking care of Jose, was Jose's caretaker.
Right. Clea, do we have more time or do we have to go to questions now? We can go. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so two wonderful pieces. On the left, Doug Sharon, and on the right, John Patrick Mckenzie. Both of these have a similar kind of insouciance, lightheartedness, I think. Both artists, in a sense, kind of have a little bit of a pop sensibility, I think, in terms of their references. For Doug Sharon, often using collage, found materials from magazines, I presume. And in this case, this kind of everyday fellow sort of overlaid with these enormous looming black hearts. I presume they are hearts. Maybe this is a feeling we can all relate to somehow. And then on the right, fantastic piece by John Patrick Mckenzie, who you know, for years has been doing this practice of a kind of poetry, I guess you'd call it, repeated or phrases that are partly repeated, usually about a person and all the things that they like or don't like. In this case, someone named Dr. Lyon, who I don't know who that is, but Ajit, maybe you do, and all the things that Dr. Lyon does and does not like, but organized into this kind of peculiar rainbow arch. Ajit, do you know anything about the subject of this drawing?
I don't. About John Patrick Mckenzie's?
No, about Dr. Lyon, who is the person who's referred to in
I don't know who he's referring to, no.
Yeah. I Googled him and couldn't find anything, but often it's famous people like, you know, John Wayne likes ice cream. John Wayne likes Great Pyrenees dogs.
A lot of Linda Ronstadt.
A lot of Linda Ronstadt. This one is unusual in that in addition to that repeated phrase about Dr. Lyon, it begins with the phrase something along the lines of 3 bacons helps to lose weight or something like that. So I guess maybe 3 instead of 4, you know, is the way to go. That's the John Patrick Mckenzie diet. You'll notice on this that there are these kind of peculiar interruptions to the pattern where there are gaps that can't really be explained by anything in the syntax. And there's one wonderful place where the phrase actually sort of continues from the far right to the far left. So it actually is a complete circle, which you can go and look at and find yourselves later. Next. Okay, so here's some two wonderful kind of anomalous pieces. The one, I think another James Miles ceramic on the column, which you could easily miss if you're not looking carefully, and another kind of peculiar animal form that was up above the front door, as I recall. So tell us about these, Ajit.
Again, the James Miles was that kind of wonderful discovery. I didn't know that he worked in ceramic form, but he made a number of drawings of a similar subject. So there's a couple of pieces that I almost used that were on wood, and it was the similar kind of miniature airplanes or airport scenes. The animal form, again, he did, I think Eric, one of the other instructors, was telling me that he did a number of those. That's the only one I could find of that animal form, but I just think they're wonderful and very playful.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think that's it. So now we're ready for questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take over and look at the chat, see if anybody asked a question, or if you're interested in asking a question now, please go ahead, just enter your question in the chat and it will be read. All right.
Any questions?
Not at the moment. From Cheryl Ward, John Patrick made a great one about Kamala Harris, and she put it in her office.
Does Cheryl remember anything that Kamala Harris likes, according to John Patrick Mckenzie? Does she like Joe Biden?
We have a question from Megan. What comes first, the idea for the show or the artwork? And did you have a theme first going on in, or did the pieces spoke for themselves?
Well, it kind of happened simultaneously. So the overall approach was I wanted kind of to move from recognizable forms to pure formal abstractions. I wanted very abstract pieces, just mark making. And the selection process, it was definitely in dialogue. So it was what kind of spoke to what and what sat well with one another.
Great. We have another question from Aileen. On the Artsy website exhibition page, there are several other selected artwork that are not included in the gallery per se, right? So could you describe your curatorial selection for these pieces in relations to the rest of the exhibition?
Oh, so that was mostly because the CE gallery is very tiny. Vertically, it's quite shallow and things start to look busy very quickly. So the idea was to keep things very linear, almost like a timeline that work could kind of sit above or below, but pretty much adhere to. And the other work just couldn't fit in the gallery space. If there was a bigger space, I would have loved to include everything.
Yeah, I know. I hear you on that one. Ajit, a question for Michael. What was your biggest surprise you had while curating the exhibition?
I guess it was just some of those discoveries. Again, being familiar with an artist and their body of work, but seeing kind of different stages of that career or practice that I'm unfamiliar with. So like Linda Davenport is an extraordinary artist who works solely with embroidery now, but she had these very kind of delicate colored pencil drawings that are kind of blocks of interlocking color. Again, very similar to Alicia or maybe Annie Albers, these kind of textile drawings that make perfect sense, but were utterly surprising at the same time. And there were many of those.
Yeah, no, you're right. And actually, as a follow-up question from Michael, how about you, Larry? When you first saw the show, what was the biggest surprise, or did something surprise you?
Yeah, well, I think I was really blown away by Jose Campos's work. So that one was just as an artist I hadn't known of, a great surprise. But I think also, the more time I spent with the show and realizing the kind of the subtlety of Ajit's vision and the care of how things were put together and juxtaposed, you don't see that very often in exhibitions. Exhibitions usually have some kind of fairly mundane intellectual premise, and then, there are works to illustrate the idea. And to see a show like this, and you could really, I guess, feel that an artist curated the show because it is done with such care about, artistic qualities and the way the works speak to each other across those qualities. So that was a very impressive surprise for me.
We do have a follow-up on the Kamala Harris piece. So apparently she likes law, Willie Brown, money, chocolates. So it seems pretty on point to me. But so I think we have one more question, and then we'll move on. But so one question actually that is kind of more generic, and maybe for all of us here, is what are the artists doing during shelter in place? Do you want to start with that?
Do you want to speak a little bit too, or?
Sure. I mean,
I could talk a little bit about it briefly, I guess. So we've kind of transitioned to distance learning with online platforms and art supply drop-offs. I co-teach a meditation and a Tai Chi class and an art making workshop class. So there are many classes offered by the instructors with different focuses and points of emphasis. We have many different class size options with small intimate groups and large communal art making sessions. We still have dance parties every Friday, which I look forward to. Yeah, I would say that funding is still a little precarious. So we're always at risk of losing funding or a portion of funding. So hours have been cut and positions have been terminated. So I don't want to be doom and gloom, but it's still kind of a precarious situation. So the support of the community through art sales and things like that are very much appreciated and felt at CE.
Yeah, and we miss all the artists, obviously. Not, seeing them every day feels weird in many ways, but our instructors have been doing such an amazing jobs into delivering work and supplies, and the artists are currently working from home like everybody else, and classes are being held, as you said, and there is work that is being made that I'm hoping to, get back eventually to the studio, and maybe 20 years from now we'll look at it as like, oh my God, this was done during shelter in place, and there's going to be, a new you coming in and like digging for treasure the same way it happened for the show, I feel. And yes, as Michael Napper mentioned, we also get some art mail. So Michael has been doing this amazing kind of like correspondence through mail with artists that are like just, sending him back work, and it's kind of beautiful. So yeah, things are happening. It's not easy for anybody, but things are happening. So, well, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Ajit. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will be sending a survey, actually, following up this conversation. And thank you again for, this beautiful show. I speak for everybody here and everybody who has seen the show. I think it's one marvelous piece of work. So, and I hope to see you both soon, actually.
Thank you, Clara. Thanks, Ajit. Thanks, everyone at CE. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Clea and Larry, I kind of think of you as the patron saint of the arts, and it was great to talk to you. And thanks, everyone. I hope it wasn't too painful.
Not at all, not for me. Thanks, everyone. Bye.